Hi, I'm Gretchen Hirsch. I'm a sewing author and blogger. My specialty is sewing vintage patterns and retro-inspired clothing. Today I want to talk about underlining, which is a really interesting sewing concept that I think is one of those things that you want to do when you're getting a little more advanced. It's different from lining. Basically what underlining is it's using, taking two fabrics and making them into one, a fashion fabric and a support fabric. Now, why would you want to do this, you might ask? There are a lot of reasons why you might underline something. One of the most common is to just give support to your outer fabric. And the red skirt behind me is a really good example of that. This is a really thin suiting that shows every little stitch. And so what I did was I underlined it with a silk organza, which is a common underlining. So you can see that there are two layers here. There's a white silk organza on top of the red suiting. And one thing it let me do was I anchored my hem stitches right into the organza, but not into the suiting. So I have a perfectly invisible hem. And it gives this skirt a really nice crisp structure. Other underlining reasons are you might be looking for opacity. I made a red lace dress a couple years ago, this really beautiful like cherry red chantilly lace. And I wanted to do an underlay underneath it to give it opacity. And so I would underline then. And it was also lined. So these are two different things. You can have an underlining and a lining. Underlining is also sometimes called flat lining and interlining, but they're all pretty much the same concept. This idea of the fashion fabric, which in this case is my red suiting, and then the support fabric, which is the organza. So let's talk about how you would do this. What you're going to do is you're going to take these two fabrics and cut them out separately. Now in this case, you can see I've cut a bodice out of some bright orangey red wool, and then I've cut it out again out of muslin, which is going to be my underlining in this case. And when you're thinking about what underlining fabric to choose or what support fabric, you want to think about a good match or a good marriage between the fashion fabric and the support fabric. One of the biggest mistakes I made when I was learning this technique was I underlined a silk crepe de chine dress with a crisp silk organza. And those two fabrics have very different hands. The silk crepe de chine is very flowy and very drapey, whereas the organza is crisp. So not a good marriage at all. And what you're going to see when you pair those together with the stiff fabric underneath the flowy fabric is you're going to get puckers, and it's going to be pulling and sort of dragging. The outer fabric will be pulling and dragging. It's not a good thing. So you want to think about two fabrics. You can put them over your hand, two swatches over your hand, and see how they meld together. So really common underlinings would be silk organza. It's really strong, it's crisp, it works well with fabrics with some body to them. If you're using something that's a little more flowy, you might look for a batiste or a crepe de chine as an underlining. But then if you're looking for something with more structure, a little bit beefier than an organza, in this case you might want to look for muslin. One of the projects I did recently was a wool coat dress, and I really wanted the bodice to have a lot of structure and be very curvy and sort of not boxy, but really hold its shape. So in that case, I paired a muslin with a wool, and that's what I'm doing here today. So you can see that I cut out a bodice. You can see my dart marks here and everything. I cut it out in the wool first, and then I cut it out in my muslin. You only have to put your marks on the underlining. And this is another great part of underlining, is that you have, your marks are very clear. You're not trying to put, do your little tracing wheel on wool, which, can be very difficult. So what I have here is the two layers. Some people cut out their underlining and then use that as the pattern to cut out the fashion fabric. I like to do them separately. It's just a personal preference, because I find that sometimes the fabric can shift, like the muslin or the organza can shift a bit and distort more than a paper pattern would. So I do them separately with my paper pattern. And then I mark whatever marks I need on the muslin only, the support fabric only. So here you can see I have my darts. So let's talk about how you're going to make these two fabrics into one strong, stable fabric. So I have a needle threaded here, a hand needle with some silk thread, which isn't really necessary. You can use all-purpose thread. And let's just start on the side seam here. Actually, let's pin it first. That would be a good first step. Okay, so you're going to put the two layers together and pin. A good tip I got from a friend who used to work in a really fancy Broadway costume shop was that you want to pin, in this case, with the sharp ends pointing out, because that creates some tension between the two fabrics, almost like just a little bit of tightness so that you don't have any slack or anything like that. So you want to match those layers up. So I'm just going to do part of it there, but you get what I mean. So you're just pinning the two layers together, matching them up, and now I'm going to do some basting, and I'll just do the side seam here so you can see what I mean. I'm going to do it within the seam allowance. I just kind of eyeball it. I have a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to just keep it at, 3/8 or 1/2 inch. I don't generally knot my thread when I do this, so I just remember not to pull it all the way through. And that's it. You can just take really big stitches. And now these fabrics are going to be held together. So let me show you a piece that I have that is fully basted. So I did these long basting stitches right within those markings. And now I'm going to show you how you would sew a dart with an underlining there. It's really the same concept as any other dart, but I wanted you to just be able to see this so you can see how the two fabrics work together. So I'm going to fold my dart just as I normally would. I like to put a pin right in the point, horizontally like that. And then, same as always, I would just match up my dart legs, like that. Oops, they're not even close to matched up. And because the basting is inside those dart legs, I'm not going to be stitching over it when I go to sew it on the machine. So I'm just checking from one side to the other, make sure those dart legs are lined up. And now I'm pinned. So now I'm just going to sew this as I normally would, but because I have that basting in there, the two layers aren't going to shift at all. So just a regular stitch length, going to back stitch. And I'm going to finish my dart. And as always, you don't want to back stitch at the point of your dart. You just want to go really gracefully, as one of my teachers used to say, go very gracefully off the edge there so that you don't have a pucker there. And then you can just tie that knot by hand. So here you can see, I have sewn the dart here. On the inside, you can see how I have the two layers working together. And I can feel, I don't know if you can see, but I can definitely feel how this has a really strong structure to it. And it's going to give me a really nice structured bodice. So here on the inside, some people like to cut out the underlining at this point because you don't want too much bulk in your darts. So one thing you could do is just cut the muslin out just within the dart. And of course, you'd want to remove all your basting once you'd sewn your stitches and everything. So that's the basic principle of underlining. And at this point, you just sew as though these two fabrics are one. And then you could line your entire project if you wanted to hide everything within. And then another thing you want to think about is hemming and any other stitches that you're going to be doing by hand. You can do them just into the underlining fabric rather than the outer fabric. And then you have this really beautiful clean finish on the outside.